Okay, welcome to the show. Starting about a minute early, there's my dear little clickety-clacks. Welcome to Evolution Hour. I love the old typewriters and analog clocks. Isn't that exciting? And almost as exciting as tortucanwordpress.com, my website. And we'll stop our sharing there and commence with the program. Okie doke. Hi, I'm RJ Downard. And hi, Brian and Terry and Immutable Destiny in the room. This is today's Evolution Hour. Those of you who have been following me the last few months will know that I have been dissecting Contested Bones, which is an anti-evolution creationist book by Christopher Rupe and Dr. John Sanford of genetic entropy fame, that a critic of creationism had spotted it and didn't want to spend time going through it themselves and offered to send it to me free for me to analyze. And I say, hey, yeah, I, of limited means, am more than happy to receive the thing. And so what I've been doing is plowing through it chapter by chapter, constructing a full source analysis of it, which involved tracking down what sources are used. As you can see from the book, it's got footnotes, but there is no index. There is no reference bibliography per se. So that means you can't tell at a glance what subjects have been brought up. You can't tell immediately what sources have been used. So I've been constructing a master reference bibliography and a breakdown of how they're treated. Are they using the material for authority quotes? Are they secondary source commentaries? Or are they technical articles? Are they books? What? And it turns out that a big chunk, 40% or so, are just for authority quotes. Another about 30% of it are actually technical literature, but about half of that is misrepresented, as you've been seeing in the last weeks. And I'm continuing on with that. What I want to do from your end is that I put in citations that are directly accessible, full text, freebie. So whenever I encounter things, there are things I'm able to gain access to that you can't follow up on directly. And the whole point of the argument and the source methods approach is you don't have to take my word for it. Don't take my word for it. Track it on your own. So I list the source material that are available open access, and I got a bunch of stuff on it that I've listed today. The issue involves Australopithecus sediba. This is their chapter. This is one of the Australopithecines that's still uncertain how closely it relates to the actual human line or not, but it has an interesting mixture of bipedality and ape-like characteristics and some human elements that are homo elements, not fully modern human, that make it really interesting and broaden the range of what is known about Australopithecines. That's not how the creationists look at it. All the Australopithecines are off in the non-human ape category, and Rupe, who's basically the point man for the argument, essentially cherry picks information that reinforces that ape, chimpanzee-like quality, and ignores everything else. One thing that isn't mentioned, and I've been kind of dangling this point quite a ways back, it's that the creationist baraminologist, I think Todd Wood was the one, he did an analysis fairly recently, a few years ago. That's the creationist systematics approach. And he listed Australopithecus sediba in the human holobaramin as a human being. Oops. And it's probably because there are some of these human characteristics or more homo, our genus of homo. You always ought to watch out about when you're talking human in that. We don't mean a modern human. We mean over enough on the line that it's spilled over into our genus category. That because of the way they analyze their techniques and they parse the data, it's possible to get these curious lumpings. And that's exactly what happened with this. Well, Rupe and Sanford aren't discussing this. They just ignore that aspect. They have their little dogma that they want to look at. Anyway, the topic that they've hit at the moment in the book is the Broca's area in the brain. For those of you brain groupies, you'll already be familiar with this. If you're not, there are a variety of brain systems that are related to how we process language information. There is no single place in the brain that does language. It's a mixture of things, none of which are unique to humans. They've been inherited and modified over time. One of which is Broca's area, named for this scientist, Broca. years and years, spelled differently than Tom Broca of NBC News. And then there's Wernicke's area, which is another one. And these areas definitely show up in a more human layout in Homo habilis brain endocasts, which, by the way, Rupe and Sanford pay no attention to whatsoever. But here they're trying to argue that you're not seeing the early stages of these processes in the brain endocast that came up with this beautiful skull that they managed to find of Australopithecus sediba. So I put in the links to them. One of them is Dean Falk's Interpreting Sulci on Hominin Endocasts, Old Hypotheses and New Findings. I'd go the fancy schmancy route of putting up a direct link visually and put up a show and tell, but I'll just do it this way because you can find the link directly in the video descriptions. I'm an old flunk. And then there's also that's a 2014 paper, by the way. And then there's a 2011 paper, The Main Deal, the Endocast of MH1. This was this new skull that came out. Falk had some disputes over some of the fiddly bit details that Carlson had done in their paper. And naturally, Rupe latched onto that like a limpet to argue, aha, you see, there's no indication of this. It's just purely ape-like. Well, you read the papers yourself and you see what you think about it. Don't take my word for it. Don't take their word for it. And another one that they relied on, the creationists invoked, was Simon Keller's A Comparative Magnetic Resonance Imaging Study of the Anatomy, Variability, and Asymmetry of Broca's Area in the Human and Chimpanzee Brain, which was a perfectly fine paper on how much you could tell just from an individual example about how asymmetrically divided. Broca's area is on both sides of the brain, in fact, but one area is more focused than another, and that's what we find in our humans, where we have a highly hemispherically divided brain system where we have specialization between the left and right hand. And how much can you tell about that in early incipient cases? And they were, Rupe and Sanford were conclusion jumping to say that because you couldn't tell by the gross anatomy details the asymmetry issue, that therefore meant that you weren't having things going on otherwise. And again, go ahead and read the various papers involved. There's also a link to a National Geographic one that Rupe invoked. It was a really nice article from 2011, which fortunately I had because I have the National Geographic. There's a little reconstruction of dear old smiley face Sediba, who probably has better scholarly skills than Kent Hovind certainly does, and maybe Rupe. And so it's quite an interesting article because it goes into the details of how the fossil was found and the geological context of it. And all Rupe did was cherry pick one little line out of it where they were talking about this brain endocast issue, tossing aside all the other information. So that's the annoying tendency that we tend to get into with anti-evolutionism generally. Hopefully, Jackson Wheat may be showing up. We'll maybe have a few other guests that were said they might be able to come in fashionably late. We'll see how that is, and we can discuss other matters, because I do want to keep everybody apprised of what we're doing in the Rocks Are Still There project, which is our disassembling of the Answers in Genesis books. And for those of you who review the evolution hours after the fact on later YouTube, you may notice some of the people in the comment section will be either favorable or unfavorable, and I encourage everybody to make comments on it. One of the unfavorable ones that's been haunting these things for quite a few weeks is C. Brown, who is a young earth creationist, and he is as confident of his own brilliance as it's possible to get. He knows way more about all these subjects than any of those pesky little evolutionary scientists do. And I'm urging him to write that monograph and send it off to them. But as it is, he absolutely is convinced that he just devastates and obliterates my argument. He buries me. He absolutely destroys me. And anybody can go read the stuff. I tell them this stuff is going to be kept on. I don't delete anybody. Everybody gets to look at it. Go ahead, fine. He lobbed a paper at me, in fact, on fibroblasts. There we go. It's a hard word to pronounce. That are proteins that supposedly. So how did this evolve? And I told him, I don't know. And I did some looking up on it. I hadn't been aware of that particular paper before, so I'm adding it into my tip bibliography. I did a little background research. Fibroblasts have gone through a bunch of gene duplications. They're a really old biochemical system. The biological dating suggests mutation rating suggests that they go back 700 million years, so they're Precambrian. There seems to be some connection between them and the immunoglobulin. I don't trot out the words nearly as easily as Jackson Wheat does. Immunoglobulin folds, which are related to another section of things. So there's component things that need to be gone on. And so far, I haven't seen a great deal of material where they've delved into the deep evolutionary roots of the system. They're probably in about the same stage as homeobox genes are, working out the proto-HOX genes, because you're so far back in the biology that it's hard to do that by immediate retroengineering, because you don't have enough examples of outliers to deal with. Like if we had an Ediacara organism to look at its DNA, we see another one. Immutable Destiny asked me in the live chat, RJ, are there any good sites you know of to learn more about evolution? I'm already familiar with Talk Origins. Talk Origins is useful but dated in some respects because there's just not a lot of updating on it. I wish I could say that there was just a few, but in fact, you'll have to go the other route. One thing I would recommend you do is pay a point of looking at pnas.org a lot. They are a weekly science journal. They are paid for by our taxpayer money. They're proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And everything in it's free after a year. And a lot of the articles are free even up front. And they are basically a window onto the cutting edge research in all fields. They won't be necessarily specialized all that often on paleontology. There will be a little bit on cosmology issues, but not as much as you would get in a specialized science journal in that respect. Science and Nature are also perfectly fine ones to look at every week. They're weekly, but those aren't open access, and you would have to have a subscription to them. Although odds are, if you live in a fairly good metropolitan community, you can get the science issues from your local library. I can do that here in Spokane, and we have a bunch of colleges, and that you can get Nature at any of the college libraries. But PNAS is freebie online after a year, so it has an accessibility. Most of the proceedings of the Royal Academy of Science are freebies in there as well. So that's another one to look at. Now, what you're looking at there is the technical material directly. Now, if you want to look at some commentators and others, Carl Zimmer is superb. Darren Naish on paleontology. You can follow him on Twitter. Hi, Jackson's here. And also go through your library. You also can pay attention to things at general books and journals like Scientific American and National Geographic give you a window onto the field in a fairly good way. And so there's a bunch of different avenues that you can follow up on this. The reason why I want to poke you into the technical journals is that this is the cutting edge. This is the meat. And if you find that when you're looking at the titles and the content, you're going, oh, eyes glazing over, then that's a clue that there's an awful lot of the basic terminology that you have to get under your belt to be able to deal with it. I'll guarantee you, though, that when you reach the level, which I've done just by dint of effort, I come from a historical background. I didn't have a technical science training. When it gets to the point where you can understand the vast majority of technical papers just off of the mark, that means you're in a position to be able to spot when bullshit comes up, when creationists are playing jargon games, when you know the material better than they do. So that's all part of it. Maybe Jackson, the question came up, what are some good general sites that can be used for evolution education, other than my own tip work, but that's still rudimentary. You can jump in and offer some insights on your own end. Hi.
How you doing? It was very roboty, and I couldn't make out a lot of what was said.
I hope I'm not roboting. I've got my menus cut down so I don't have extra things floating along in here. Let me see. Maybe I can cut off a few more.
I don't know, but
ads here.
What was the question?
The question was that what are good sites that can be used for evolution education?
Good sites for evolution education. Well, I think
window. I got one thing. That's probably my bad.
Wikipedia is a fairly decent place to start because of technical sources. There's Berkeley's Understanding Evolution.
Yeah, some of that is fairly general, though. You get these little short squibs, but they're not really hot on the technical follow-ups. But actually, Wikipedia, yes, I should have thought of that myself. Wikipedia, it's not an end destination. Don't rely on it. For the same reason, if you were doing a term paper in high school, you'd be slapped on the wrist, I think, if you were using Wikipedia as a source.
Yes.
But they are a useful window because they call attention to a lot of work. And then you can go to the primary source work that's alluded to there. You don't stop with Wikipedia. Don't let them do your thinking for you. But they're a good little window. Yeah, I make use of them just to find out what's up on the field. When a topic comes up and I'm going, oh, I haven't heard of that one before, I'll see what Wikipedia has to say about it. And sometimes they're not really answering the question I need, but they're giving me some side information. In other cases, they're just chock-a-block with technical literature that's right up the alley. And so, yeah, that's a good one. An area that is fairly technical but useful are the annual reviews. There's annual reviews of genetics, an annual review of thus and such and so, and annual reviews in there. They're not or weren't always open access easily, but an awful lot of the papers end up either on Academia EDU or ResearchGate or on collegiate websites where you can get most of them. And the advantage is, just think a Scientific American article on steroids, because it's written by a really big expert in the field, and they're writing it to describe the summary of the area for other experts. And so it's really at an in-depth level that's a bit above the kind of generic thing that's aimed at the popular audience in a Scientific American. So there's a way around it. I wish I could just say, well, there's just the site you need to go to, but evolution is such a colossally large field. I see Brooke is here too. Hi, finally made it. Let me back up a little bit because we got some more questions in there and I don't want to let any of them get by the missing here. So I hope that answered a little bit of the questions. Puffalophagus asked if any YECs or IDEers tried to deal with desmotilians and explain them away yet. I haven't a clue. I'd have to look that up. I'm trying to think of what the hell are demostylians. Sounds like a protozoan or something, but maybe Jackson would be familiar with the term. I'd have to look it up in my bibliography to find if I've got anything on it. And then
Berkeley evolution.
And so that one is, I don't know. I'll say you this, that most topics in biology and paleontology don't come up in the anti-evolution literature. Remember, I'm measuring this. So 90% of the data field's off their scope. So odds are they probably haven't done anything specifically on it. Korag asked, do we have any evidence of any animals that have gone extinct due to genetic entropy? Nope. That's an easy one. And Jackson, I think, can infer that as well. Genetic entropy is a non-starter. We're going to be having a really juicy section on genetic entropy in the new Rocks book. And the point is that there's no sign of it being real.
In my debate with Standing, he said at one point that there was evidence of it in like Neanderthals, I think, which he pulled out of an orifice normally associated with solid waste. There's absolutely no evidence of that. When he said that, I was flabbergasted. I was like, where the heck did you get that idea?
John Sanford, certainly wasn't from that. It's he may have been riffing off of Tompkins, if you'll recall the section that we're going to have so much fun with this Rocks book, because the stuff that we've dredged up on this, where we've examined the background detail, that in Tompkins' case, he tried to argue that there was decline in human ages and the like, and this was demonstrated by the genetic data. But he drew on a material that was 20 years old, and it didn't dawn on him that like science hadn't stopped in 1997, and that's always a dangerous sign when they're dealing with older material. Because this idiot on a debate forum is asserting that H1N1 going extinct due to lethal mutagenesis is proof that no species can exist for millions of years. It's worse than absurd. It's not even wrong.
If that's because that's the one that Sanford used, where he took a chart that was about how the incidence of H1N1 in young people declined over time, to say that H1N1 declined over time, which is like,
yeah.
Nyom.
It was a matter that what they were arguing is that might be some indication that antibodies that were being generated from people who were becoming exposed to it were improving the odds that young people could survive the virus. It wasn't an indication that the virus had grown less lethal.
In fact, so we have a number of
had undergone any modifications.
Yeah, there are a number of papers out there that are about mutations affecting the pathogenicity of H1N1 and how it's changed over time. It's like there are novel mutations with regard to pathogenicity, and so it's completely wrong. It's not even wrong.
Yeah. I have a question, RJ, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly. And sorry, I'm a little late today, but for what you were saying there, are they trying to say that basically what we know about herd immunity disproves evolution or something?
Yeah, they're trying to do that. That supposedly that there is, in fact, Walter Ramin has been trying to argue that there's this grand conspiracy to suppress this fabulous information that's been determined by the creationists, and it has the tiny flaw in that there hasn't been any information to suppress on their side. They're absolutely terrible about it. Nobody takes it seriously. All the stuff that's been done is by Sanford and his groupies. He's got a little cluster of people, most of whom are young Earth creationists, but they've now spilled over into the intelligent design movement, where their articles are showing up in some intelligent design anthologies, as we're pointing out in the new book. That, with any luck, will be out this year. It's going to be juicy.
Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that one. Like, it's like, no, we understand how this works through evolution. See, we've developed the herd immunity to this virus, whether it be through vaccines or us having grown immune to it, having it and having the antibodies, which therefore would be, to an extent, changes in the allele frequencies, thus not having as many people being sick to it, which makes the population healthier and better fit to survive in their environment.
Yeah, even if you have read my tip 1.7 section on the Michael Behe's testimony and attempt to jujitsu evolution off the field with it's not the chloroquine case, but it's a different one of the
complexity.
No, but it's a different example of antibiotic resistance that he trotted out at the Dover trial, and it was a terribly bad argument. And I went into it in some detail, looking at the thing is that they never quite work out what they think is going on with all of this stuff. And even the one microbiologist who is a creationist, ironically enough, even he doesn't dispute the evolutionary data. He's writing evolutionary papers where he just kind of has his little creationist hat tossed in a corner somewhere, and using standard biology because it's what works. If any of these things, if genetic entropy were as patently real as Sanford really wants it to be, it would have shown up in every bloody organism on the planet by now. And no, we don't.
So RJ,
instead, what Standing does when he's talking about genetic entropy is you have a single case for genetic entropy, and then for Jensen's argument about the increasing homozygosity, he has one organism which he takes out, both of which are taken completely out of context.
Oh, Brian G, always welcome on the show. And Pelagia is always welcome on the show. He's usually busy doing other things up there in the wilds of Canada. He's kind of north and slightly off to one side from where I am, and they're always welcome. But yeah, always like to have extra people floating around, so anybody with the wrench can throw it to him.
I have a question. Since you did mention that genetic entropy was happening, well, were you there to see it? Part of my horrible Aussie accent to anyone who might be an Aussie in the chat.
Were you there?
Yeah, that's better. There you go. That's a better one.
I don't know. I'm not good at accents.
Yeah, you get a lot of these fascinating little buzzwords that knock around. Sanford does, after all, have a training in genetics, although he's, I think it was like animal biology, in that it was off kind of biology. In a corner somewhere.
It's plant biology.
Yeah, plant biology. That's right. Yeah. And so he wasn't exactly somebody setting the house on fire in that discipline. And when you jump over and read the current genetic works on this vast scale. You know, it's like you've got the creationists in a little teeny box somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, telling each other they have all the data, and then you realize you're looking around and you're going, whoa, you're way off in a corner somewhere. You're so far behind the curve, you don't know that all this stuff is going on way over here. Come on, join it. Party's fine.
Well, I mean, that's like that's like I was in this chapter I'm working on right now. You have Minton's a cell biologist, right?
Gosh, I'd have to look into his background. If he is, he certainly doesn't manifest it.
But the other guy, there was another guy I was looking at who did work on tadpoles back in like the 70s. He was the first guy I looked at for this chapter. Was it Gary something?
Well, I'll do it when I read your section on that. We'll be able to thrash over all the little fiddly.
You're right. For him, he basically did the same thing. He's like, it's this guy who's in this extremely narrow field, and so he goes to genetic entropy essentially. And it's like, I mean, you know, there's no problem with kind of moving around within your own field, but if you're not making, you're right, as you say, if you're not making waves in your own area, do you think that you're going to make huge waves, you know, elsewhere? I don't know.
Yeah, you tend to get just looked at in terms of the overall, and this is not just young Earth creationists, and this is intelligent design. They tend to be people who are not in the fields that they're talking about. So you get an awful lot of people in non-biological fields. Relatively
like
few of them are zoologists or geneticists or paleontologists. They tend to be physical engineers, astrophysicists, mathematicians, industrial chemists, electrical engineers, all sorts of things that they're used to seeing designy stuff because they work it in an engineering context, and they don't realize that they can't willy-nilly apply that. I can see Brooke probably practically cringing at the prospect of these people that want to invoke design parameters.
You mentioned design and evolution.
Triggered Brooke.
Ooh, no. I just had a debate on that.
Have you had your debate with Standing yet?
No, it ended up getting changed to where I debated Neffy. Which was
God.
I'm sorry. Yikes. How did you fare with Neffy?
I ended up at some point. I ended up losing it a little bit at the end.
I did, yeah, me too. He can drive people nuts.
It was after the debate was over. I finally just lost it on him.
He's a hyper presuppositionalist, and all he does is hammer away.
Yeah,
he can't shut up about his thing, and you can't move him past his little talking points to discuss anything.
Yeah, he didn't like when he asked me a question, and I'm like, "That's nothing about how something evolved." I said, "That's nothing to do with evolution. That has nothing to do with the debate." Next question. It didn't deal with design and that. So I even gave him in my opening statements. I gave him that evolution was completely made up and not true, and there was a designer. Now he has to present that the designer was intelligent and would have made the mistakes that clearly were made if there was a designer.
Was specifically the God of Abraham.
Yep. I said he needs to prove it's his God and everything, and he just completely fell on his face. In his whole chat, I'm going to do a reading of the comments for that at some point, because his chat was just absolutely disrespectful, where literally
Hi, Pelagia. I see he's in the live chat there. He's got kids there to deal with.
I see what is it? A Standing's little may or may not be sock accounts in the comments section. There's like one in particular who I think might be a sock account, but he might not be. But he's always like, Jackson didn't say anything about this. I was like, did you not listen? Yes, I did.
Yeah. The reason I say
I'll tell you this. I have 0 sock accounts. I have me.
Yeah.
And there's no other me online. If anybody pretends to be me, they are a force of evil and not to be dealt with. I put everything up. I put my own mug on my little picture. I don't have some icon in there. I'm exactly who I pretend to be right up front.
I have a couple of different ones that I use, but they're for different things. I have one for my transition journey, which I need to do another video on. I have one for gaming, and I have my main one here. I mean, they all just do different purposes. So yeah, either one of but all of them I think have my mug on it. So it's not like, you know, I'm going to hide and I'll use either one. But no, Neffy he was trying to argue evolution. I kept saying, And we were supposed to have a 5 minutes back and forth, and he spent almost the entire 5 minutes just rambling on. I'm like, no, this is supposed to be a back and forth part. We had 3 where you asked me questions, then I asked you questions, then you asked me questions, and I asked you questions. Response.
I'll give a brownie point to modern day debate, or formerly modern day hysteria, James. He is a really fair and amiable interlocutor.
Definitely.
And he would actually tell Nephilim to just move on. So we've done this subject, we're moving on to another subject. Yeah. And the problem is if Nephi can get his own little thing going in his after chat, he's running amok.
Yeah, it was supposed to be hosted by them, but he was having tech issues where they couldn't hear us, and they could hear him, but they couldn't hear us. So it was just like, all right, I gave Nephi more credit than he probably deserved. He's like, well, we can do it on my channel. I'm like, fine, I expect you at least follow the rules. Yeah, I know I need my head checked for that.
Don't ever. No, he's a nice. I think Neff is a nice guy. I really do. He'd probably be a good person to have lunch with, but never, ever, ever will I talk to him about science again.
No.
Yeah, Scientist Mel. I think Scientist Mel finds him perfectly agreeable as a person.
Oh, I know.
But boy, as a debater, he can drive you nuts.
He purposely knows that I use she and her pronouns, and I told him twice. And in the middle of the debate, he still used he and him, and his whole chat, he hasn't corrected him once. His whole chat is filled with purposely misgendering me. And I'm going to make there's one guy on here who just completely just got off the rails. And I'm going to make an entire video about his comment section, because it's freaking comedy gold in its own right. But if you want the debate, I'll send it to you.
Shameless plug time. We're about halfway through the show here. How time flies when you're having fun. Let me bring the thingy up in here. I have find that the joy of actually getting my Patreon account to actually function has made a wonderful change in things, because I've actually unlocked the money that you wonderful people have done. And so thank you. It had just been hovering around in the woodwork there. The colleagues, Andrew and Hendril and Eric, and researchers, Keith and Fino and Brad and Ralph and Meet Convert Me and Pelagia. Oh, Pelagia, there you are. And Tsur and Zeshi, and assistant researchers Dyer and Dornkamp and Nya, or not available, Staggles and Suris, who's helping me do the audiobook of Phileas Fogg, and Totas Real, and the friends Eat Meal, and Stephen and Marigale. Stephen, who's helping to do some technical advice on the geology sections of the new Rocks book. Daniel and Bo and Alex and Paul, and some legacy patrons who helped back in the ancient times when we just started this up. And I still thank you, Jen and John and Mona and Son and Everett. Everybody who has helped enormously. And now we'll find out as the months go by just exactly how that's going month by month by month. So this has been a little bit brighter time starting off 2019, to the point of where I actually have ink. And that's really, really wonderful. You know, the joys of printing. I love being able to print things, because like that thing that I just held up here, normally when I would be doing a follow-up work like this, I would have to store the PDF, and then I would have to remember where I had the thing from, because I don't have a hard copy of it. I don't need to print up the whole bloody thing. I only need to have some reference point where I can then categorize it in my filings to figure out where it's going to be and how I'm going to be discussing whatever. And the ability to print stuff is nice. Oh, I will also point out Evolution Slam Dunk. This is the book that I already have out. I've got a link to it in the video description section. I'm very proud of the book. It's a book on a subject no one had done before. That's why I wrote it. It covers the reptile-mammal transition and how everybody who has ever bumped into it on the anti-evolution side gets it totally wrong. And so it's a blockbuster thing. Christine Janis, the paleontologist, was thrilled with it and called it a tour de force. And so just rely on her and make a point of getting the book. RJ can use the royalties, and you will get a really kick-butt analysis that will bring you up to speed on a really vital subject matter. Anybody that follows me on Twitter already knows I bring up the reptile-mammal transition all the time, because I know exactly what they could do as a response. And most of the time, they don't know enough even to respond. But in the rare instance that they do, if they bring up Scott Hughes or John Woodmer app, I'm there ahead of them. I've written the damn book on it. I know everything they're going to say, everything they could rely on, everything they couldn't have fact checked. And so it was designed specifically to gather in a lot of material, and covers a lot else too, because I discussed quite a lot of the technical material on gene duplications and endosymbiosis and feather evolution, because they actually connect up with the things that are related to the reptile-mammal transition, and plus creationists have been remarkably stupid on them. So there's a way more there than just the reptile-mammal transition example, but I've nailed that one down. And we'll be doing this on an even larger scale for the new Rocks book with Jackson, where we're going to be going after the geology and cosmology and so many genetic subjects that it's sort of frightening how many topics the creationists stumble into but don't do enough on to show they really are being fair with it. But it's giving us an opportunity to really run with it. Go ahead, Jackson.
I told PZ about that yesterday, about how massive it already is, some 6 chapters in, and how many references we have so far, how many pages that is. And it's pretty crazy. Also, I remembered it was Gary Parker. Gary Parker was the name of the guy.
Oh, Gary Parker.
Yes.
Yeah, he's less active now. He was more in the Henry Morris era in the 1970s and 80s.
Well, he wrote a chapter for AIG, and I skewered a single paragraph in it because he only had one thing that was novel, that one paragraph. That was it. Nothing else he said we hadn't already covered before. So
yeah,
he was basically the Monty White, Monty White kind of guy.
It's been really fun because I think both of us have discovered so many interesting areas that neither of us had known about in quite that depth, that we've delved into because we're tracking down the little side crannies of what's being brought up by the creationists and realizing, oh boy, not only are they so bad on discussing the stuff they actually bring up, but there's like this huge world of knowledge that we want to bring to the field to say, hey, this is way more interesting. The creationists can't ever get as interesting as the real science is.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree. As I was doing research for this chapter, because it's on, skewering David Minton because he's doing a whole bunch of vestigial arguments, and he goes after the appendix in depth and says, he makes a number of claims. For one thing, he says that people have been historically getting it removed simply because Darwin said it was vestigial. I could find literally no evidence for that claim.
Yeah.
No, I could find literally nothing on that claim online. Do what?
Are you serious that he said that?
That's actually, I've heard that claim before. And I'm kind of glad Minton brought it up because it gives us a chance to hit it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of these things they want to be true. Oh, Immutable Destiny asks, what's the strongest indicator for the reptile-mammal transition, and don't include Tiktaalik? Oh, and I don't include, I discussed Tiktaalik along the way in Slam Dunk, but no, the critical one, my favorite ones are the probanognaathids and diarthrognathids. These are these little critters, dare I say mouse-like, Jackson, but they're small little critters that have a unique characteristic that was explicitly predicted by Robert Broom in 1912. And the whole point is it involves the jaw structure, because the thing that's so distinctive about mammals is that we have a single giant dentary bone, the one that bears the teeth, and that's the only bone we have in the jaw as adults, and it hinges on the squamosal bone up in the skull. And we're the only vertebrates that do that. No other bones. All the other vertebrates, the reptiles, the fish, the amphibians, all have an articular quadrate connection between the articular bone, and there's a whole bunch of bones after the dentary bone before you get to the articular. And the articular articulates, that's why it was called that, on the quadrate bone up in the skull. Completely different bone than we use. How the hell could that happen? Well, Robert Broom was looking at these new synapsids that they were finding in the late 19th century that were odd reptile-y things, but they had one skull opening instead of 2 like the diapsids. And they also had this dentary bone that was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, kind of like the way we do in our embryology, where we start out with the reptile jaw layout and then the dentary bone just takes over. And he thinks, they were thinking this is probably the group that mammals evolved from. But he was looking at this and you go, well, wait a minute, how can you do the jaw shift? How can you switch from an articular quadrate to a dentary squamosal and be functional all the way. And he put on his little thinking cap in 1912 and said, you know, there's only one way this is going to work. It's got to have a dual jaw joint. No animal is known that has a dual jaw joint, where the articular quadrate is still in there as the jaw hinge on the inside of the jaw, and the dentary squamosal has formed on the outside of the jaw, parallel to it, so that they're pulling together simultaneously. Then it takes over and the articular quadrate becomes marginalized and gets pulled up into the middle ear. And the other detail was, to do that, you have to morph the skull around so that the quadrate and the squamosal are at the same spot, and the dentary bone has to expand and form extra processes so it's in a space next to where the articular is. He predicted a whole layout, including muscle attachments. So when in 1932, they started digging up the first of the diarthrognathids that were exactly what he had predicted, a totally new form of life with a completely unknown jaw configuration required as a necessary step to get from reptile to mammal. That's slam dunk. Either that or God really loved Robert Broom and decided 250 million years ago that I really got to make a bunch of fossils to make the evolutionist happy in the 1930s.
Well, you know,
does this sound plausible?
I mean, is anything God does plausible? Or, you know,
yeah.
I says anything God does plausible.
I'll type the word in there. Probanignathus.
Also, we will be featuring Tiktaalik in our book. He gets a chapter from David Minton. So I will fold him into the chapter I'm working on currently. So.
Yeah. I have a question, RJ. How can you say this? I mean, you're doing what? Providing evidence and facts. Don't you know that the Bible's the only
shame on me? Oh, one creationist. I've forgotten his name at the moment because I joust with a ton of them. But he made the mistake of prattling on again. And I said, do you really want me to list all of the 500 technical papers that I listed on the reptile-mammal transition matter in my book? And he said, go ahead, because he didn't think I did. So I proceeded to do so, and it took me like 2 or 3 hours to paste each one of them into the damn Twitter.
Oh my God, RJ. Jesus Christ. That's sadistic.
Oh yeah, well, I was dedicated to technically, and you know, he had the gall. Technically, I left out the stuff on that I left out on hominids, which I had included in that 500 number. So I only had like 475. And he said, you lied when you said you had 500 sources on this. You said, I'm going, oh my gosh.
Wow.
475. You know what? In that instance, it's close enough for government work. It works.
Indeed. Well,
yeah, the total number of sources.
I mean, if we're talking Ken Hovind government work, then sure.
And
just in case, taxes.
I suppose in part of the shameless plug bit here. And by the way, you can find my GoFundMe site and the a Patreon account thing in my website. You can go to them, and I'm very, very happy to have everyone do that. But here's my bibliography in relatively small print, and it runs for 100 pages.
Yes, I've seen that. That was what just really blew me away when I first got it. And since we're on that, I was supposed to ask you, when will the audiobook be done of Paralogs for Phileas Fogg?
I'm up to about chapter 28 or so, okay. And then Suris still has to get up to about I think he's got up to about chapter 15. He has a bunch of life to do as well, but we're plowing through that. Once I'm done with that, then I'm going to tackle the rewrite to do Slam Dunk in an audiobook context, because there's a whole bunch of things in terms of technical references that won't make any sense at all in an audio context, and I'll have to revamp the text in that. What I'll probably have to do is generate a working functional bibliography that can be done as a PDF file that I can have posted so that anybody that wants to make use of it can see the crib sheet that will go with the audiobook. But we'll cross those bridges when we come to them.
Okay.
Neprikos was saying Mike Riddle. That's who he was thinking of. One of the people who had the gall to challenge us on our technical sources.
Oh my God, that was hilarious. That was actually hilarious when he said, as Nephew was saying, you know, when he challenged us, he said, because he said to you, he said, name the people, and you were like, okay, well, there's this person, this person, this person. He said, well, then stop bluffing, and you were like, what? Like what? Excuse me? It's like, that's not a bluff. These are several people. I mean, that whole conversation was just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Is a credulous fellow, an amiable credulous fellow, but still a credulous fellow, who all he knows how to do is copy other people's argument. He's a bottom feeder. And that puts him in the same ballpark as Kent Hovind and Standing for Truth, for that matter, as an example of somebody else, that everything he tells us about evolution and their theory is all stuff that he's cribbed from somebody secondarily, and he's never bothered to fact check it. You get a lot of those pseudo scholars.
And yeah, he reads no technical work, and that is painfully obvious because I've gone through. Because I looked at his chapter on information for the chapter I'm working on. Because this one is going to be, this one's kind of running through a whole bunch of AIG chapters. Because I'm kind of trying to smash down what they have.
Yeah, how many answers books are we filleting in this? Is it 4 or more?
Yes, we're doing 4, and so in some chapters we're going to be kind of running through a bunch of their arguments at the same time because a lot of them copy from each other or they are very light on citations. Yeah. Like Minton is going to have a bunch of citations, so it's necessary to pick his apart piece by piece. But Mike Riddle, for instance, doesn't. He uses kind of vaguely philosophic arguments, and we don't really need to skewer philosophic arguments. It's not really necessary.
Yeah. Riddle was the one who was writing the flood geology, one of the flood geology radiometric dating chapters. Somebody who knows zip about radiometric dating. All he's doing is copying Andrew Snelling. In his information chapter, he's just kind of talking about some definition of information he and a couple of other creationists came up with. And then in Does Evolution Have a Chance, he doesn't really cite anything. He's just like, well, evolution means complicated stuff evolved. And if you flip, it's like flipping a coin. It's like, no, it's not. It's not like flipping a coin. And that's how he conceptualizes it. Neppy is asking, are there any live debates with creationists you guys have got set up for the future? He always loves stumbling into one. I don't have any planned. I would say that there is the prospect that I will have fewer and fewer debates the more people see my previous debates and decide that maybe debating me is not a wise idea.
I'm not debating standing again, so nobody ask.
Hey, Jackson, what are you debating standing again?
I'll shoot you. I am not ever debating that. He's so just dishonest about everything he says.
His tunnel vision is extreme. I've been jousting with him because he will occasionally be commenting on stuff. I always ask him to document your stuff, and also I keep on asking him so far fruitlessly, do you fact check any of this stuff?
Oh, RJ, you gave me C. Brown. So thanks for that.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry for poor C. Brown. For those of you who don't know, C. Brown is a young Earth creationist who has been haunting my videos. And I guess like venereal disease, he can spread into other people's contexts.
I was actually
but at any rate,
I have yet to get him, so I guess I'm lucky.
No.
He was on my web. He came on. I actually let him on the show once. Yeah. And I couldn't get him. He's like Nephilim. You couldn't get him to stop spieling his spiel. You would try to have him ask because I wanted to talk methods question of how he came to the views he did. No, you couldn't.
Well, you know
so
what's
I
funny,
finally he just stomped off finally, and I wouldn't let him back in.
Well, RJ, it's funny you say that because he went on one of my videos and he went on one of my comment sections and was like, RJ never let me talk. I was like,
okay.
I let him talk. He never said anything, and then of course he keeps on. He has a tremendous. He has got Dunning-Kruger on a Trumpian scale in the sense that he imagines he's so incredibly knowledgeable because he has read the creationists that he's copied. And although he did toss that one paper, as I pointed out, on the fibroblasts at me. I don't know where he got it from because I didn't have a mark on it. I didn't have it in my bibliography already, although it's no guarantee that it wasn't talked about by some creationist at some point.
Oh,
to do some research.
He threw a whale paper at me, a paper that someone was doing on the Hox genes involved in the reduction of limbs in whales. And so he threw this paper at me, made a whole bunch of claims that were not in any way indicated in the paper, and then said, explain that. And I was like, I think I had work or something like that, but I was like, I'm not wasting time on this schmuck. And so somebody else went in there and was like, here's how you misrepresented this. Here's how you misrepresented this. Also, all this argument came from Evolution News.
Yeah.
I thought that's hilarious.
Oh, and you'll be delighted to know, Jackson, that one of the latest things he was lobbing at me was Proto-Avis.
Oh, he said that to me too. He posted on the Avialin video, and I slapped my forehead and said, I'm not wasting time on it.
I mean, it was so pathetic, and I kept on telling him, I have written about this in Dinomania. Have you read what I had to say? And he won't do that. He won't.
No, because
the fact of the matter is that Proto-Avis is not regarded as a legitimate taxon, and there's every reason why if you ever looked at the details. But poor little C doesn't do that.
No, because he has literally no background in science. I guarantee.
Oh, yeah. It's like
he can't even spell.
He reminds me of Neffy, where along the same lines. Because when I asked him, I said, what degrees or drafting or design experience do you have? That was one of my first questions. And it was literally just to show that he didn't know what he was talking. He was like, well, I don't have any, but I think I can talk on this. And I'm like, and you're talking to me and I don't play so nice. And
yeah.
RJ, you saw me against C. How well am I when you get talking on my turf of design? I don't play nice. I play raw.
Well, because you have an expertise in the area. Oh, by the way, before I forget too, I do have the second part of the today's show, which we're already 3/4 of the way beyond. Taz Walker, a CMI posting, because I follow them on Twitter, they tossed this thing about this particular deposit down in Australia that Taz Walker was insisting was a giant flood deposit. And no, it isn't. And so I put some links up to Taz Walker, the little short one they did, and then a longer one that Walker did, which actually has some references to it that you can follow up on, and a technical paper from 2004 on the real thing, which you can compare the level of detail between Taz Walker's creationism and the actual technical papers on the subject. And there's this intriguing subculture there of lobbing mystery things as though they mean what they do. But every one of these things involves a very great landscape. In fact, one of the things that was involved with this deposit was what it was telling about how the land masses had been rotating and shifting over time through plate tectonics. And so a lot of the debates about how you work out what paleopoles were in relation to the particular land masses. Needless to say, that data would need to be incorporated into a creationist context where you end up with continents whiffling around like on a funhouse ride and people getting whiplash. I made a joke in the old Dinomania thing. This shows you how long ago this problem has still been knocking around, that I thought all the creationist lawyers should get together and try to do a class action suit against God for the extinction of the Harappa culture in India, because as the Indian subcontinent slammed into the Asian plate, it caused all the little Harappa culture to whiplash, and they broke their necks and they all dropped dead, you see. And so maybe they could get a class action suit going on.
That's hilarious. I would definitely endorse it.
Yeah, that's because they tried to put too much into too little time. I'll tell you about the example that I use as an analogy of what's wrong with the compressed creationist time frame, and it's 5th Avenue and 42nd Street in New York City, because I'm a historian, and so I was aware that it's where the Empire State Building is now, but that wasn't what was there to begin with. It was just nothing much until the Astors built some of their mansions in that spot back in the 1860s or 70s, and then eventually one of the sons inherited his house, the Waldorf side of the family, and he detested his Aunt Caroline. So he decided to tear his mansion down and build a hotel there, which he called the Astoria, for his side of the family, the Waldorf. And the dear old lady stuck it out there for quite a while, until I think 1900 something or other, 1890s. And she finally gave in and moved farther uptown and built a new mansion. And so they tore down their side of the place and built the other half that they were going to call the Waldorf Schermerhorn for her family. But they talked her out of that. And so it became the Waldorf Astoria. And it was, they actually technically designed it. She demanded that the design have one more floor in it than the one next door, so that even though it looked the same height, so that they would have technically one more floor than it was tit for tat. And they had connecting doors that could be closed up in case the two hotels split, but they never did. And then in the 1920s, the old hotel, they decided to move uptown, which is where the modern Waldorf Astoria is, and they were to build the Empire State Building. So all of this took a long time to happen. It didn't happen all at once. But young Earth creationism is the equivalent of trying to cram everything at 42nd Street in one time frame. So what you have is Mrs. Astor trying to hold parties in her mansion while people are streaming in to reserve places at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. At the same time, they hear a tremendous crash as the B-24 slams into the Empire State Building up on the 82nd floor, and engine parts are raining down on the carriages down at the main entrance to the Waldorf. No, it doesn't happen all at once. And you can't cram that much time frame into that short of a time a bit that you're trying to do with these layers on layers on layers of landscape, that some of which involve slow things like raindrops and delicate little deposits that are ripple marks and things that are gently tilted and then gradually eroded, and then new things on top of them. Sicker Point up in Scotland. These are all examples that I brought up on here. See what else is going on here. Korag says they don't believe in macroevolution, but they do believe in superevolution. That's the fun part. Yeah.
I'll make a video about that in the near future. So yeah,
that's the fun part about. It's the thing about young Earth creationism as opposed to everybody else, because intelligent design and old Earth creationism don't give a rat's ass about speciation, because they have this big leisurely time frame that, in fact, if they started thinking about it, they've got a problem that not much is happening. And the god is basically twiddling its thumbs for a really long time and doesn't seem to be doing anything. Well, you have the opposite problem with young Earth creationism, because they have a bottleneck that only they have to deal with, which is Noah's Ark. So they have to have a set of created kinds, X number, and that created kinds over about 1,500 years generated diversity that gets killed in the flood. So all the fossils that are dying, that are preserved in the fossil record, are due to the original created kinds. And then the created kinds X are on board the Ark. They come off, and then they can proliferate into a completely different set of organisms. They're the ones we see today. And that too had to have taken place in only about 15 or 1,600 years. So they have a double whammy bottleneck going on, and in order to keep the booking list for the Ark down, because it's only a limited size of a ship, you can't have millions of species on board. It doesn't work. They have to have big kinds that proliferate species. So one little finch kind is on board the Ark. I'm not making this up. That one little finch kind is on the Ark, according to a Leitner. And all 1,200 species of finch that exist today came about in only the time since Noah's Ark hit Ararat. And that's true for all these other species, except one. There's one species that's a species, and that's us. Well, we have to be a kind all of our own, unless it includes Australopithecus sediba.
That also extends to the rove beetle family Staphylinidae, which has many thousands of species within it. So,
and I don't know whether they dealt with nematodes, because so many of them live in aquatic environments. But when they can wrap their brain around the million nematode species and the places that those little critters get into, were any of them did Adam and Eve ever have worms? I don't know.
Oh yeah. Who was bringing on the parasites on the Ark?
Well, actually, here's the thing: they wouldn't need to take on the parasites or the insects because they didn't have the breath of life in their nose yet. Evolution through kinds would never work, even though they
C.
would.
Brown is in the room.
I know. I was about ready to say, RJ, look at the chat.
C. Brown, don't tweet. You're driving. You will slam into something that is inappropriate behavior. You're already off the rails as a creationist. Please at least try to be a civil driver.
Yeah, I told a creationist that one time. He was like texting me, and I was just texting him, and he was texting me, and he mentioned he was driving. I was like, "Don't text me while you're driving. What are you, crazy?"
Sheesh! You wrap yourself. You don't want to meet your maker that fast, see?
Yeah. Yeah. But I just find it funny that they're like, oh, well, things don't go over kinds. Well, then the insects, because remember, everything on the earth had to die out, had to die, and the flood.
Oh,
So
Brian says, could someone send me the link to this show if C. Brown gets on? Brian, C. is not going to get on this show. No, I had him on once before, and he was an annoying jerk who couldn't keep his mind focused on the questions I wanted to ask him. Excuse me, if you're going to be on my show, it's on my terms. I think everybody that's seen the show knows that I'm not an ogre, and that I even though I do like to talk, I also love to have good conversations with people. I think the show last week with Matt Herron was wonderful, and he made a mention of it on his own blog.
I'm so sad that I was at work for that. I really wanted to be there.
Yeah, I would have loved to have had you on there too, because I told him, it says if you had been on, you would have had some far more techno geeky questions for him than I did.
I was so sad. I was like, oh, I got work, crap, and then I'm just
but at any rate, yeah. So C has been begging to get on the show again, and I told him, no, Buckaroo, you can put your comments up in the section, and you do. And there's no, I don't edit them, I don't delete them. You get to blither blather all you like, and I want that to happen. So everybody who looks at my videos can see all those little comments from C. Brown and marvel at his brilliance, and they can deal with it on their own terms. And don't take my word for it. Don't take his word for it. Investigate on your own. That's
definitely don't take his word for it.
Yeah,
definitely don't take his word for it.
Yeah. Yeah, and the wonderful thing is that there's the ring of truth. There was I can't remember the physicist who did this years ago. It was an old PBS series, but he was talking. It was called the ring of truth, or dealt with the ring of truth, which is how you would tell that a physics argument, because he was basically talking the history of physics, made sense. Is that there's things where suddenly it's like the light bulb going off, and all the facts start making sense, and it's elegant and beautiful, and that had the ring of truth about it. That's what you find in any scientific discipline, that when somebody is pushing an idea, a hypothesis that is really not encountering any headway, that's where you're telling what's going on, and that it takes time for the dust to settle. Well, evolution has done that in spades. That evolution came along as a model in the middle of the 19th century, and has been tested and tested and tested. It went through a fallow period before the development of modern genetics, where they didn't know how inheritance worked, and it fell into eclipse, to where there were very few technical Darwinists in 1900, because Darwin was kind of talking about gemules and that, and it was considered kind of old hat. But then the neo-Darwinists picked up the thread and realized that all you needed was the new genetics, and you could see how that variation with inheritance would work perfectly under neo-Darwinism, and then it jumped forward. And it's undergone some wrinkles with punctuated equilibrium and epigenetic factors that are adding in, and homeobox genes and all the stuff that we're dealing with today. But it's still natural, and it's still completely Darwinian in the general sense of the word, natural branching common descent, which is how I like to use that, rather than the more official allele changes in a population, which is technically true. But flapdoodle creationists can accept that too. So I like to use the natural branching common descent definition as an intro, because no anti-evolutionists will typically not agree with that definition. And then you can get down to the issues about what speciation is and how you detect that in fossil contexts and all of that, which then you can bring up the natural allele changes as you go along.
One of the major issues I always see when talking with creationists about evolution is that they always have the idea that they're willing to agree everything up to microevolution, which they typically don't define, or they define it in terms of nothing, like kinds.
Or information.
Then they say, oh, well, we just won't get to macroevolution. Even though we have a definition of that word that works, they don't. And then they say, we've changed the definition, even though we invented the word. And so it's like, then from there, you got to show them the technical literature where it actually says that this is what the definition of macroevolution is. Yep. And then it's very funny what happens after that, because they're kind of like,
yeah. That's why I love bringing up the reptile mammal transition case. There was an article, and you'll find a whole chapter on it with Krieger, and I think Jackson will be going, oh yeah, Krieger, yeah. with the reptile mammal transition, where Kathleen Hunt had done an old post back in the 1990s for Talk Origins, where she went through the then known steps in the reptile mammal transition. And it still holds up really well, because basically I followed up on all of the subsequent technical work in those particular taxon areas. And she was often very insightful about where she was suggesting there would be new information coming along. But Krieger just goes through this and just flushes the data down the drain. And there's references to these double jaw forms. And you're going, excuse me, but you had to have seen this in the original text and you don't mention it to your audience? Oh, you could literally see him suppressing the data field. And I defy anybody to go through that Kathleen Hunt list, taxon by taxon by taxon, with the measure of how much variation can occur in natural speciation that we can see in the living world, and not be able to connect the dots.
But speciation doesn't happen.
Well,
No,
most of them,
unless it does.
Well, most
yeah,
of them
and again, you got this problem that young Earth creationists have to accept not merely speciation, but super duper on steroids, lickety split speciation. Yeah. Way faster and at a range that no existing biology can support. No evolutionist has to have mutations cropping up at such gigantic level. And yet, ironically, that's exactly what's required to cram everybody on board the Ark.
Yeah, and not to mention that no genetic bottleneck of everything has ever occurred.
Or 7 for the clean animals.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, yeah, I mean, what is it? I mean, the cheetahs got down to what, like, I think they got down to like, what, 150? Jackson, you might know this number better than me.
Yeah, it is.
It was,
I mean, yeah, 150 is considered low. It's considered very low. So
yeah, like,
it was ridiculous.
Yeah, like, and they barely are surviving right now still because of the genetic issues they have.
They have extreme.
Yeah, you simply cannot have a viable population that's that small.
Yeah, they have very, very common genetic disorders like kink tails. That's one of them. They have low sperm count. Yeah, they're not in good shape. They're all like more or less like clones of each other. Basically, they're that genetically similar.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of that actually even works for a clone animal like that, and it's a really interesting one, and I talked about it in my one video, is the New Mexico whiptail. That's an interesting animal. You should do something on that one, Jackson.
You're talking about
I was fascinated.
Actually, RJ, that reminds me of something. I actually, here it is. I met with a guy, a biologist here at LSUS, and he gave me this little article.
A lizard foretold.
And so it's talking about I'll send it to you for reference. It's about a lizard species that was predicted based on species that were found in an area. So they were predicting the existence of a lizard with a certain number of copies of chromosomes should be in this area. But also, in addition to this, there's a really interesting paper. I don't know if you have it in tip yet, but it's on the Spidicellus that under laboratory conditions, it became a tetraploid. Can you believe that?
Are we going to be putting that? Do we want to be putting that in the speciation chapter in Rocks?
Let me see if I can find. What did I do with it? I don't. Let me see if I can.
I'll say this though. I'm a New Mexico whiptail. It's a really interesting species of lizard because it's one that reproduces asexually, and literally they're pretty much just clones of each other. And they're interesting. It's an all-female species.
Yeah, a Spidicellus uniparens, the
parthenogenetic. Yeah, I think that's fairly unusual for land vertebrates, but fish do it all the time.
There's quite a variety
of those.
And that's why I found it so interesting. It was just like, wow, that's actually really, really cool.
And this is just one of them. There are several other papers on that topic, so there's a list there's more for follow-up.
Yeah.
So.
Even there was an example at Eastern Washington University where I have my alma mater. Every year they have a Darwin Day thing, and they bring in a scientist speaker on it, and they've been absolutely wonderful ones. And one that proved to be radically more interesting than I was expecting it to was a thing on hybridization in chipmunks, which you go, oh, well, yeah, okay. It turns out he is one of the major systematists, and he's been focusing on the dynamics of how populations shift back and forth in Northwest squirrels and chipmunks, and that there's a antagonism and the nuclear genes of hybridization zones are taking place in which you've got compatibility with one but not the other, and so it added yet a new layer where they could predict the dynamics of how hybridization zones were going to be going on in these chipmunk species based upon what their mitochondrial distribution was versus their nuclear DNA.
Oh,
so pretty neat. Yeah, it's just fascinating. It's the guy. I don't think it's Sunderland, but it's like it starts with an S. I can't think of the name right off the bat because I'm often bad on that sort of thing. It's why I have to write damn crap down so I don't lose track of the material. But it was a phenomenally interesting thing, and I added a ton of technical literature, not only from what he was talking about in his speech, but also his systematics work, because he does a higher level taxonomy stuff and is one of the major characters in the field. So we get some really damn good lecturers knocking around here out of DWU.
RJ, I got to get going. I got some
stuff and we're past the hour anyway. Okay. I have to grab a salad at some point. Well, anyway, there is the links in the field, and anybody who wants to help the project can become a Patreon or go to the GoFundMe. And even without that, get your damned evolution slam dunk. You know, if you really hate somebody who's a creationist, you can buy it for them too as a birthday present. But it's so valuable that I think you'll probably want it just for yourself, and let everybody know about it. And all current readers, please make sure you've rated and reviewed it, Amazon or wherever you got it from, because that's all part of the spreading the news thing. And let everybody know about it, because it won't do a damn bit of good if people don't know about it. So anyway, thank you all for today's audience. And we will be happy to be here next week again with more examples of why science is interesting and creationism is really stupid. So, bye.
How did Brown do that?